Education discussion, preparing for school meetings and creating partnerships. Welcome everyone. Let me just get started with our presentation. Brilliant, you should now be able to see the screen. This is the format for the education discussion. We are only recording the creating partnerships and school meetings. Research shows that good parent-teacher relationships result in increased educational outcomes for all children. And it's this joint working which is what creates the best educational experiences, not just for our own child, but for all children. Children are going to be the winners when teachers and parents work together as equal partners. And that's going to be what drives inclusive schools and then makes for an inclusive society. And that's what we really want, I think. So Homeschool Partners. If you've been part of our TESA programme, this is a key component of the programme. Having a close partnership between professionals and parents, and with the confidence of the parent partner, is what helps adoptive parents to talk about behaviours. A partnership develops between adopters and professionals. And it's that close partnership that lets us as parents talk confidently about our child's needs, and that helps us to be able to advocate and access better informal supports for our children through our networks. And that's really the type of relationship that we want to have in schools too, one where we're valued and trusted as parents and valued and trusted as teachers too. And the child is very firmly in the centre of that. Whichever role we have, we do want the best for the child. And the context might shine a light on a side of the child that we don't normally see in our context. So we've got to be open to that other perspective and look for the information that that person is bringing to the table that's going to help us get to know our child even more. Another perspective is going to add value, basically. Parents are the experts in their children, so teachers need to take advantage of what is known. And likewise, as a parent, we need to understand that environmental factors are going to influence our child's behaviour, so they may well present differently in the school context. And some of those things, class numbers, the personalities in the class, and the building layout are going to be out with an individual teacher's control. Another thing to think about is that we want all people to feel safe and secure in the relationship and when they're in school. And not all parents have had a really positive experience of school themselves. So there might be things that we can do inside school that would make people feel more comfortable. So we might not have a meeting in the head teacher's office, for example. We might choose the nurture room as a venue, and we might offer a tea or a coffee to help kind of ease everybody into a discussion. We really do need to trust that the person sitting at the table with us wants the best for our child. Teachers will be doing their best with what resources and knowledge they have, and any problems that come up within the school environment will need both the teacher and parent perspectives to be able to solve. Parents have got other commitments like demands of siblings, elderly parents, work commitments, and they're not available to take phone calls from school every day if there's a problem. Likewise, teachers have got 30 kids in front of them, some with IEPs, some with health needs, quite a lot of them with additional support needs. And very often the teacher will be the person that's trying to meet all those needs on their own on a day-to-day basis. So a teacher will have limited time for planning. So remember that they've also got to plan different levels of work for the same lesson. And after planning, they've got to go and get the resources. And after teaching the lesson, they've got to reflect on it and be able to mark it. And all of those things take time. So although a teacher might want to be able to meet with a parent as soon as a parent requests it, it might not be possible for them to get back as quickly as they would like, purely because there isn't enough time in anybody's day. Another limit that both teachers and parents have is that they are both working within a system. So there are procedures that need to be followed, and sometimes those procedures aren't clear to everybody involved, and it can also take a really long time to complete. An example of this might be the fact that you want to buy in an instructor or you want to buy in a resource, which should be really easy if you've already got the funds, but what you're looking to buy might need to be on a local authority procurement database, and that can take a really long time to actually complete. We all work long hours, and it should be possible to find a time that a working parent can make. So we don't have to have face-to-face meetings anymore. We can have a telephone meeting or a video meeting. Again, at the meeting, make sure there's enough time for everybody to be able to say their piece and to listen and digest what everybody else is saying too, and try not to go in with a predetermined course of action, because the other people at that table are essential to planning a way forward. So what we say collectively matters. It's got to be a mutual problem-solving approach, and that's what's going to help us have that good partnership. And also, we need to be aware that there is always a staged intervention, a staged approach to interventions. So we need to follow certain procedures that are set by local authorities in order to kind of move up the supports, I suppose, because if we start with a support at the tier 1 level and we've met the need, then that's great. There's not a need for a next level. But if there's still a continuing need, then you would move up the scales, as it were. And each time we do that, we need to gather evidence and impact of supports. So, and that is part of the procedure. As a parent or teacher, we need to make sure that the child's right in the centre. We are all responsible for educating the child, and we need to do our bit, whether that is learning about the system and sharing our knowledge of our child or putting strategies into place. And if, as parents, we can learn about the system, which teachers have got to work in, and how it might compromise what can actually be done in reality, then we've got that shared responsibility, and we can work together to look at any systematic barriers that might be in place. This means nobody blames the other side when things don't work. It's no one person's fault. We've both got shared responsibility for education. A parent might not be responsible for the planning of a phonics programme, but they do have a responsibility for understanding the value of education and of learning. Learning takes place every minute that we spend with our child. When everybody works together, the school will be more inclusive and the children will flourish. And if there's a conflict or a disagreement, let's think about bringing in a neutral person, a neutral voice to move that discussion on. We're all passionate about the child. We're passionate about making things better. And sometimes if our perspective is not shared by someone else, we just might need somebody else's help to open up that perspective a wee bit. Schools often get to know families really well and can be ideally placed to help when family life is a struggle. So they can be a gateway to like a whole variety of supports. They can help with financial supports and put you in touch with organisations that might be able to help. They can support with parenting or counselling, as well as being the organisation that might be able to help, can help with educational supports. Offering support means that any communication that goes back and forward has to be clear to the other person. So we're not using any sort of jargony language. We're going to explain what we mean by the curriculum or by assessment or by support. And when things aren't clear, then it's the other person's responsibility to say, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? And I think as part of that supporting each other, it's also really nice to be able to show an appreciation for the other person's insights, because it reinforces how valuable we are as a joint team. Not all children find the school environment easy, but it helps when parents still talk about the value of education and talk positively about school and what the school are trying to do, even if they've not quite got the supports right yet. Keep the hope alive for the child that they will succeed, they will be able to overcome barriers, that we're confident that in time the school will get it right and it will be better for the child. We're all working together. And again, we've got a responsibility, I think, as parents to share information about our child. If something happens, has happened, or is likely to happen that's going to affect how the child copes or behaves within the school environment, then share it. We don't need to go into lots and lots of detail, but it might be that the teacher or the adults can make a change that would make the child feel safer on that particular occasion. Again, staying connected means that we've both got a responsibility to do that. So we can be open and welcoming when a parent or a teacher has got a concern. Because you're on the same side, it's an opportunity to move things forward. We can plan together. And if we've got that approach, then parents and teachers are equally responsible when things are going well and succeeding for the child. And we're equally responsible when things are not going well and need adjusting. If we've got respect and responsibility, then we've got a good relationship. Parents are the foremost teachers, and we've got a responsibility to interact positively and be role models and provide guidance. Parents are teachers, and this should be recognised and valued. For us as parents, we're knowledgeable about childhood trauma and its impact, and we might be responding to our child in what looks like an unexpected way to somebody else who doesn't have that same knowledge of trauma and the impact of trauma. So, for example, a traditional parent might raise their voice or put in a punishment if something might happen. And if we are following therapeutic parenting and we're aware of the impact of trauma, that's not something that we would do. We would focus on regulating, we would focus on striking when the iron is cold. And when there's good partnership working based on trust and respect, then teachers will be open to learning why we do things differently and be open to carrying over the same strategies that will work in their environment. But remember, the strategies might need tweaking in order to fit in with the different environment and context. And we as parents have got a responsibility to promote inclusive education and to be aware of neurodiversity. And when conflicts arise, we're looking to protect the relationship that we've built up, and we might bring in another person to help move things forward. It's all about making sure that we've got that inclusive atmosphere and that feeling of support. And I suppose very often someone might be so passionate about something that they come across as defensive, but it really helps if we see any suggestion or any complaint as an opportunity to improve communication and understanding rather than take it personally. Let's try not to be defensive about something, and that's where the no blame approach is really important. Be open to learning. So if you come along today looking for information about the system, these are the different levels of planning that you might come across, and terminology might vary between authorities, and Alison's book, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, will be a really good starting point if you want more information. And another really confusing thing is that sometimes your child will have multiple plans. So again, I talked about a staged approach to supports earlier. The first tier of supports would be supports that are carried out by the class teacher in the class. The second tier of supports would be supports that are carried out in school by a support for learning teacher, a classroom assistant, or someone else in school. And the third tier would be when you've got support from a partner service like Bernardo's or speech and language, someone else that comes into school to provide a service for the child. And then the fourth tier would be when you're looking at alternative provisions to school. So the personal learning planning, PLP, is when every child's learning is tracked and next steps are formed based on their progress through the curriculum. So teachers will differentiate learning and outcomes based on the child's progress, and that's for everybody. A GIRFEC plan, so GIRFEC stands for Getting It Right for Every Child. If you have a GIRFEC plan, and sometimes they might be called Team Around the Child meetings or Young Person's Planning meeting or a Child's Planning meeting, that's all connected to a GIRFEC plan, or a multi-agency plan is another way of saying it too, because there are basically multiple agencies involved in providing the child's support, and that will generate a plan with specific targets and action points. An additional support plan might exist for children with neurodevelopmental conditions that need a slightly higher level of adjustment in order to be able to access the class learning, and this might be recorded in a more detailed plan, and it records the specific strategies that the teacher should use to support the child. An IEP, an individual education plan, is for children whose needs are significantly different from peers and who are operating at a significantly different level. A child might then have an IEP. The class teacher is still responsible for carrying out the teaching, and sometimes there might be a support assistant too, and there's likely to be somebody who is coordinating that plan within school. But the child will have individual targets to work on. They'll be broken down into long-term aims and short-term targets. And it's very likely that the progress through the targets will be very slow, and the steps to learning will be very slow because children need multiple opportunities. The coordinated support plan is a legal document that you have to meet a certain criteria in order to be able to have a coordinated support plan. So you would have support from education, from health, from social work, and the CSP would document who provides the support, how often they provide it, and how long they provide it. And there is a set procedure for a local authority to go through to complete the coordinated support plan, and it is, as I said, a legal document. In terms of the educational input from that is going to be an IEP. So the IEP would flesh out what the coordinated support plan looks like within the school context, but it would coordinate all the other supports from the different agencies too. So a GIRFEC meeting, team around the child, young person planning meeting, child planning meeting, all care experienced pupils are assumed to have additional needs, so are entitled to meetings. And they're also entitled to be considered for a CSP to see if they meet the criteria. Sometimes as a parent, you have to ask for a GIRFEC meeting, particularly if your child's needs are under the radar. They're very compliant in school, they're not acting out, they're meeting academic attainment targets. How often you should have meetings will depend on the needs of your child. Because meetings are time consuming and will use up a lot of people time as well, if that makes sense. In reality, you might not actually have GIRFEC meetings very often. You might only have them once or twice a year because of the limitations of time in reality. And probably the most useful time to have a GIRFEC meeting would be round about transition times to prepare for a new stage. But you would also have them if there was a need. So if something cropped up in school that needed to be addressed, you would call a GIRFEC meeting at that point. The structure of the meeting is very set. You would talk about the child's strengths and the child's talents. Then you would look at concerns, what's not going so well. Then you would review the strategies that are working. There's a wee chance to adjust them. And finally, you would look at what action points are needed going forward. Do you need to refer to a different agency for support? For example, do you need an occupational therapist's input? Or do you need to include the child in a nurture group or a social communication group? Or is there a partner agency like Bernardo's, for example, that you might want to refer the child or the family to for additional support? Very often, local authorities will have specific voluntary organisations who might be able to provide one-to-one support for children or group support for children. So Bernardo's Children First are good examples of that. In Edinburgh, there's the Salveson Mine Room, or places like Canongate Youth or People Know How. But it will vary from authority to authority. But it's a really good way of bringing in an extra pair of hands into the school environment to provide support. But the support will be targeted, it will be time driven, driven by targets, and sometimes you can refer directly as a parent, which is another really good thing about that. Think about the purpose of your meeting and what's going to change because of that meeting. And because you might go to different types of meetings, you might just have a a meeting to share information with the class teacher that lasts for 5 minutes, and that's the purpose, share a bit of information. It might be the GIRFIC meeting, where you want to generate an action in order to better meet the support need. Or it might be a regular parent meeting, where it's to share academic progress and what next steps are. Again, make sure any questions you have are written down, because it's really easy to forget them in the heat of the moment, particularly if your child is really struggling or you're really struggling as a family at home with something. And again, think about the information that you want to share. Does the teacher need more knowledge about your child to understand the responses? Do they need more information about what's going on for you as a family? You are likely to need to educate the teacher about your child. So prepare some information before you go to the meeting. And again, at the start of the year, it might be things like what your child likes, dislikes, what the triggers are, what strategies work for you, what strategies have worked in the past, what you are particularly concerned about at that stage in your child's life. School will pass on information from stage to stage and school to school, but as a parent, it's something that I've always tried to cover myself too, just in case something is missed somewhere along the line. You might want to share information on a neurological condition. Sometimes you as a parent will have a much more detailed knowledge of how something's affecting your child, like ADHD or FASD, particularly if you've taken on board yourself, gathering more information and deepening your knowledge. Another adult or teacher might not be quite as far along in their journey as you are, so you've got the opportunity to share that. And again, it's a really good idea to take a supporter with you to a meeting. Someone who can take notes, someone who can stay neutral, because sometimes when something's gone wrong and we are really passionate for our child, we can get emotional, and it's not unusual to cry in a meeting. And that doesn't matter if you do cry, you still get your point across. But if you've got someone else there with you, their recall of what's happening will be perhaps a wee bit more clear than ours might be. When you're at the meeting, make sure you know who everyone is. If the chairperson doesn't introduce people, just ask. Don't be afraid to ask what that actually means in practice. So, for example, support for learning, what does a support for learning teacher do? It might not mean that the teacher is working directly with your child. They might be coordinating the support for your child, for example. People that you might expect to see at the meeting are a member of senior management, a teacher, the educational psychologist, if there is one involved. If you've got a partner agency involved, the support worker might be at that meeting too. And then focus on the goals of the meeting. Try not to get sidetracked away from that. It's really easy to go off on a tangent and talk about something that happened earlier in the week, but time is limited. So keep your eye on what it is that you want to change. And often that set structure of GIRFIC will help you to do that, because you're thinking, okay, action point, what do I want to happen? How can we make that happen together? And if you're a teacher, please can you always start with the parent's view and the parent's comment? Take notes. There should be minutes, just in case. Make your own. Management staff sometimes are the people that will take the minutes. In school, they're also the people that have to respond to something very urgently. So they might not get round to sending out the minutes to your meeting as quickly as they would like, because school life can be unpredictable. And remember that the action point is the gateway to change. So whether you want school to reframe language, or you want to refer to an outside agency, or you want a small group to be put into place, or whether you collectively think that those things will help, then that's where you get to record it in that action point. And do remember, voluntary agencies can boost staffing levels. Considerations. The impact of early life trauma can result in maladaptive behaviours. Behaviours that are not designed for your family and your classroom environment. These behaviours can sometimes be really challenging to understand or cope with. And it's the adaptive behaviours that make our children struggle more with relationships. And we know that as parents. We see that in their friendships, and we can see that, I think, within relationships with other adults, perhaps in a school context. So if your child is struggling with relationships in school, and that will include teachers who will be striving to connect and understand your child, keep in mind the fact that the impact of childhood trauma has this stress generation kind of connected to it. And if we are finding it hard to connect to our children, then our teachers are likely to find that at times too. We will connect with some people more than others. So we might find some teachers less accessible or open than others. We might find that some adults are neurodiverse and we need to adapt our own style of communication. So some of the techniques that we learn in connected parenting or therapeutic parenting can come in really handy when we find ourselves interacting with an adult who is difficult to communicate with or who doesn't appear open to new ideas. We might have to think about the other ways that we can present information or get them to think about something. Again, I can't emphasize enough, the school environment is very different to the home environment. In school, the safe person might not always be as visible or as easily accessible as a parent. There's also the sheer volume of noise and people and the unpredictability that can go along with this. There's a lack of autonomy for the child, and there's also the risk of threat that's just inherent in learning because you don't know what's coming next. We know that our children don't sit comfortably with any feeling of threat. This can be really different to the picture in the home where the parent might be a room or two away, who is always in earshot, where the child can play more freely, there are less people and there is more predictability. So although schools will work really hard to minimise environmental stresses and create routines to get it right for your child, keep in mind that that's what the child is having to navigate each day, and individual class teachers can't mitigate for all of those factors. There are limits. Compassion fatigue. Caring for a child with complex needs who's been affected by childhood trauma is emotionally, physically, and mentally draining. It's joyous as well, but it can also be really draining, particularly when your child is struggling. So as parents, we know that, and we try to take preventative measures. But teachers are also at risk of compassion fatigue, and they're not only caring for and teaching our child, they're also juggling another 30 plus children. So we need to look for signs of compassion fatigue and work as a team where we can. There is lots more to think about. So this is the point where we would open up the education discussion and everybody gets a chance to ask questions or share their experiences or anything that's not been clarified. I get the chance to clarify now. And if you want more information about education generally, you can link into our education website. And if you would like to talk more about a specific education matter, please remember that we have education consultations too.